Part 1, The Desperate Transmission. The alien research ship drifted through space like a wounded bird. Inside, Communications Officer Kira's hands shook as she worked frantically at her control panel. Sweat dripped down her blue-scaled face as warning lights flashed red all around her. "Captain, we've got maybe 20 minutes of air left," she called out, her voice cracking with fear. Captain Vex stood behind her, watching the radar screen with growing dread. 3 Zephyrian raider ships were closing in fast, their weapons already charging. These weren't the kind of aliens you could reason with. They took what they wanted and left nothing but scrap metal behind. "Keep broadcasting," Vex ordered. "Someone has to hear us out here." Kira's fingers flew across the frequency controls, jumping from one channel to another. Nothing but static filled their speakers. The nearest friendly outpost was weeks away, even if their engines worked. Which they didn't. In her panic, Kira accidentally hit a control she'd never used before. An ancient frequency dial spun to a setting marked with symbols she didn't recognize. The emergency beacon fired into space, carrying their desperate cry for help on radio waves that hadn't been used for 3 centuries. Far away, at the edge of Earth's solar system, something stirred in the darkness. Part 2, The Sleeping Giant Stirs. Deep in the frozen reaches beyond Neptune, Admiral Jake Rodriguez felt warmth returning to his body as the cryogenic pod opened with a soft hiss. His eyes snapped open, immediately alert despite being asleep for months. The revival process should have taken hours, not the emergency 30-second wake-up he was experiencing now. "Talk to me, Parker," he said, sitting up as his second-in-command approached with a tablet. Commander Lisa Davis handed him the data pad, her face grim. "Protocol Omega activation, sir. First time in 300 years. Signal came from the Galactic Civilization Zone." Jake's jaw tightened. The Civilization Zone was supposed to be off-limits to humans. 3 centuries ago, when Earth first made contact with alien species, things had gone badly. Really badly. The Galactic Council had basically told humanity to stay in their corner of space and never come back. Most humans thought it was unfair, but Earth had agreed to keep the peace. "How many ships do we have ready?" Jake asked, pulling on his uniform. "All 47 vessels of the 3rd Fleet, sir. We can launch in 10 minutes. Jake looked at the star charts on his screen. The signal was coming from deep in alien territory, exactly where humans weren't supposed to go. But someone was in trouble, and that emergency frequency could only mean one thing: they were about to die. "Prep the fleet. We're going in." Part 3, Arrival of Legends. Space itself seemed to tear open as the human fleet arrived. 47 massive warships materialized from hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with strange markings from battles fought in distant galaxies. The smallest ship was larger than most alien cruisers, and the flagship stretched 15 kilometers from bow to stern. On the research vessel, Kira's instruments went crazy trying to measure what she was seeing. "Captain, these readings can't be right. These ships are impossibly huge." The Zephyrian raiders, who had been preparing to board and strip the helpless research vessel, suddenly found themselves facing a fleet that made their entire armada look like toys. Their commander stared at his screens in disbelief. Admiral Rodriguez's voice came across all communication channels, speaking in perfect galactic standard. His tone was calm, almost friendly. "Attention Zephyrian vessels. This is Admiral Rodriguez of the 3rd Human Fleet. You will withdraw from this area immediately. The ship you're threatening is now under our protection." The raider commander laughed, though it sounded forced. "Humans. Your species died out centuries ago. We don't fear ghosts flying ancient junk." "Ancient?" Rodriguez chuckled. "Commander Davis, would you mind giving our friends a small demonstration of just how ancient our technology is?" Part 4, Demonstration of Power. A single human fighter detached from the massive fleet. To the aliens watching, it looked almost insignificant next to the huge warships around it. Pilot Ashley Brooks's voice crackled over the radio as she targeted the lead raider ship. Nighthawk requesting permission to engage. Let's keep this educational, not destructive. What happened next changed everything the galaxy thought it knew about human capabilities. The small fighter moved like it was dancing, dodging energy blasts that should have vaporized it instantly. Its weapons fired beams of light that bent and twisted in ways that violated known physics. The Raider flagship, a battleship that had terrorized dozens of worlds, found its shields collapsing under weapons fire from a craft no bigger than a shuttle. Energy beams carved precise holes through its armor, disabling engines and weapon systems without killing the crew inside. The remaining raiders fled in panic, broadcasting warnings across all frequencies about the return of humanity's ghost fleet. "Nice flying, Brooks," Admiral Rodriguez said as human repair crews swarmed over the damaged research vessel. He turned to his chief engineer. "Williams, how long to fix their ship?" Engineer Tom Wilson barely looked up from his scanner. "About 15 minutes, sir. Their hyperdrive just needs a quick adjustment. Pretty basic stuff." Officer Kira watched in amazement as human technology fixed her ship's most advanced systems like they were simple broken toys. Part 5, The New Galactic Paradigm. News of humanity's return spread across the galaxy faster than light. Government leaders who remembered the old agreements scrambled to understand what this meant for galactic politics. Admiral Rodriguez stood on his bridge, speaking to alien diplomats through long-range communication. 300 years ago, your Galactic Council asked us to stay away, Rodriguez said calmly. We respected that request. But we never agreed to ignore people calling for help. Captain Vex stepped forward. Admiral, we thank you for saving us. But everyone thought humans were extinct. Rodriguez smiled. We've been busy. Exploring other galaxies, building new technologies, learning new things. But we never forgot our core values. When someone needs help, we answer the call. Commander Davis approached with new data. Sir, we're getting 17 more distress signals from this sector alone. Rodriguez nodded to his crew. Set course for the nearest emergency. Looks like we have work to do. He turned back to the alien captain. Tell your governments that humanity is back. We'll stay in this region as long as people need our help. As the massive human fleet moved toward their next rescue mission, monitoring stations throughout human space returned to their patient watch, waiting for the next desperate call from a galaxy that was about to learn that humans had become something far beyond their imagination. The cold hit Admiral Jake Rodriguez like a slap in the face as his cryogenic pod hissed open. His body felt heavy, muscles stiff from months of frozen sleep, but his mind snapped to full alertness immediately. The revival chamber was bathed in flashing red light, and emergency sirens wailed through the corridors of the massive dreadnought. Something was very wrong. The automated systems weren't supposed to wake him for another 6 months. Jake sat up slowly, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Ice crystals fell from his hair and uniform as he swung his legs over the edge of the pod. Around him, dozens of other cryogenic chambers were opening with mechanical precision, releasing steam into the air like ghostly fingers reaching into the darkness. Commander Lisa Davis rushed over, her boots echoing on the metal floor. She was already fully dressed and alert, which meant she'd been awake for at least a few minutes. In her hands was a data tablet, and her face carried the kind of expression that meant bad news was coming. Admiral, we have a situation, she said, handing him the tablet while he pulled on his boots. Protocol Omega has been activated for the first time in 300 years. Jake's fingers stopped moving. Protocol Omega. He'd heard stories about it from the old-timers, veterans who remembered the early days of human space exploration. It was the emergency frequency reserved for species-ending threats, the kind of signal you only sent when your entire civilization was about to die. Where's it coming from? He asked, taking the tablet and studying the data scrolling across its screen. Sector 7 Alpha, sir. Deep in the galactic civilization zone. Jake's blood went cold, and it wasn't from the cryogenic revival. The Galactic Civilization Zone was exactly where humans weren't supposed to go. 3 centuries ago, when Earth had first encountered alien species, first contact had been a disaster. Misunderstandings had led to conflicts had led to war, and war had led to Earth being essentially banished from the inner galaxy. The Galactic Council had made it clear, humans were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous. Stay in your corner of space, they'd said. Don't come back. Most of humanity had been angry about it, but Earth's leaders had agreed to keep the peace. How long have we been getting the signal? Jake asked, pulling on his jacket and checking his sidearm. 17 minutes, sir. The automated systems tried to filter it as a false alarm, but the frequency is authentic. Someone out there is broadcasting on genuine protocol Omega. Jake walked to the main display screen, which showed a 3-dimensional map of local space. The signal was coming from a point of light deep in alien territory, surrounded by the borders of species that had specifically requested humans stay away. Going there would break 3 centuries of careful diplomacy. Sir, Davis continued, I should mention that we're not just talking about one ship in distress. The signal indicates civilian casualties and hostile forces in the area. Whoever sent this is fighting for their lives. Jake stared at the map, his mind racing through the possibilities. If they responded to the call, they'd be violating every treaty Earth had signed with the galactic community. But if they didn't respond, innocent people would die. People who had somehow found humanity's most secret emergency frequency and were counting on them for help. Commander, how many ships can we bring online? He asked. All 47 vessels of the 3rd Human Expeditionary Fleet, sir. We can have them operational and ready for combat in 12 minutes. 47 ships. Jake remembered when that would have been considered a small patrol fleet. Now it represented the most powerful military force humanity had ever assembled. 3 centuries of isolation hadn't been wasted time. While the galaxy had stagnated in their peaceful coexistence, humanity had been building, learning, growing into something new. They'd explored distant galaxies, discovered new technologies, fought battles against threats the inner galaxy couldn't imagine. The ships sleeping in the darkness around them weren't the same primitive vessels that had limped away from first contact centuries ago. They were something entirely different. Sir, there's one more thing, Davis said quietly. The signal is getting weaker. Whoever's sending it doesn't have much time left. Jake closed his eyes and thought about the oath he'd taken when he'd accepted command of the 3rd Fleet. To protect innocent life wherever it was threatened. To answer the call when no one else would or could. The oath hadn't mentioned anything about respecting alien borders or diplomatic treaties. Commander Davis, initiate fleet-wide revival procedures. All ships, full combat readiness. We launch in 10 minutes. Davis's eyes widened slightly. Sir, are you sure? If we cross into the Galactic Civilization Zone, there's no going back. The diplomatic consequences could be severe. Jake turned to look at her, and his expression was harder than the ice still melting on his uniform. Lisa, someone out there found our emergency frequency and used it because they believe we're the only ones who can help them. They're probably right. And I'll be damned if we're going to let innocent people die because of some 300-year-old political agreements. He walked toward the bridge, his voice carrying clearly through the corridors as crew members rushed to their stations. Besides, it's been a long time since the galaxy has seen what humans can really do when we put our minds to it. Maybe it's time they got a reminder. The 3rd Human Expeditionary Fleet began to wake up around them, 47 ships stirring to life in the darkness of space, ready to answer a call for help that would change the galaxy forever. Space itself seemed to scream as reality bent and twisted around the arriving human fleet. What started as empty starfields suddenly erupted into a light show that made nearby suns look like dying candles. 47 massive warships tore through the fabric of hyperspace, emerging into normal space with a display of power that sent shockwaves rippling across the entire sector. The ships weren't just big, they were impossibly huge. The smallest vessel dwarfed most alien cruisers, while the flagship stretched 15 kilometers from nose to tail, its hull gleaming with strange metals that seemed to absorb and reflect light in ways that hurt to look at directly. Each ship bore the unmistakable marks of countless battles, their armor scarred by weapons that existed nowhere in the known galaxy. Aboard the crippled research vessel Luminous Dawn, Communications Officer Kira felt her breath catch in her throat. Her instruments were going crazy, displaying readings that made no sense. Energy signatures off the charts, gravitational distortions that shouldn't be possible, and heat signatures that suggested these ships were powered by miniature stars. "Captain," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the alarm still blaring throughout their dying ship. "My sensors are saying the largest ship has a crew of over 50,000 people. That's bigger than some space stations." Captain Vex moved closer to the main display, his scaled hands gripping the back of her chair. The human fleet had arranged itself in perfect formation around the disabled research vessel, creating a protective barrier between them and the Zephyrian raiders who had been circling like vultures just minutes before. The Zephyrian ships, which had seemed so threatening moments ago, now looked like children's toys floating next to the human vessels. Their commander, a brutal alien named Thek who had terrorized this sector for years, stared at his own sensors in complete disbelief. His flagship, which he'd always considered massive and intimidating, could have fit inside the human flagship's cargo bay. Then a voice cut through all communication frequencies with crystal clarity. It spoke in perfect galactic standard, with an accent that was unmistakably human but somehow different from the historical recordings everyone had heard in school. "This is Admiral Jake Rodriguez of the 3rd Human Expeditionary Fleet," the voice said calmly, as if discussing the weather rather than facing down a group of notorious space pirates. "Zephyrian vessels, you will cease all hostile actions immediately and withdraw from this area. The civilian ship you were threatening is now under our protection." Kira felt a chill run down her spine. Everyone in the galaxy knew the stories about humans, the aggressive species that had appeared 3 centuries ago, caused massive problems with their violent tendencies, and then mysteriously vanished when the Galactic Council told them to stay away. Most people assumed they'd died out or destroyed themselves in some kind of civil war. Apparently, they'd been very wrong. Commander Thek recovered from his shock and activated his own communication system, his voice dripping with the arrogance that had made him feared across dozens of star systems. "Humans. You've got to be kidding me. Your pathetic species crawled back to whatever rock you came from centuries ago. Everyone knows you're extinct." He paused for dramatic effect, studying the human ships on his display. Despite their impressive size, they looked sleek and undamaged, almost too clean to be real warships. "Nice light show with your arrival, ghosts, but we're not impressed by ancient relics and parlor tricks. That research vessel is our prize, and we don't share. Run along before you get hurt." Several of his subordinates laughed on the communication channel, the sound harsh and predatory. They'd built their reputation on intimidating weaker species, taking what they wanted through superior firepower and ruthless tactics. A few mysterious ships, no matter how big, weren't going to change that. But Admiral Rodriguez's response was what made everyone, alien and human alike, realize that the galaxy was about to witness something unprecedented. "Ancient relics?" Rodriguez's voice carried a note of genuine amusement. "Commander, I think you might be operating under some outdated information. We haven't been sitting still for the past 300 years. There was a brief pause, and when the Admiral spoke again, his tone had shifted to something much more serious. "Commander Davis, please give our Zephyrian friends a small demonstration of exactly how ancient our technology is. Keep it educational, not destructive. We want them to learn something today." "Understood, sir." Initiating demonstration protocols. On the research vessel, Kira watched her sensors as one of the smaller human ships began to move. It detached from the main formation with fluid grace, accelerating smoothly toward the Zephyrian fleet. The vessel was sleek and beautiful, looking more like a work of art than a weapon of war. "Captain," Kira said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror, "that ship is reading as unmanned. It's completely automated, but the AI signature is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's like it's actually thinking. Commander Thek watched the approaching human ship and sneered. It was tiny compared to his own vessels, barely larger than a heavy fighter. Whatever demonstration the humans had planned, it was going to be short and disappointing. All ships, target that toy and destroy it, he ordered. Let's show these ghosts what happens when you threaten the Zephyrian Brotherhood. His fleet opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams that could crack planets, missiles that could level cities, and plasma cannons that had never failed to destroy their targets. The space between the fleets lit up like a miniature star as enough firepower to glass a moon focused on the single human vessel. But when the light faded and the sensors cleared, the human ship was still there. Not only was it undamaged, but it had somehow moved through the barrage like it was dancing, weaving between energy beams that should have been impossible to dodge. That's when the real demonstration began. A single human fighter broke away from the massive fleet, looking like a tiny silver dart against the backdrop of enormous warships. The craft was sleek and elegant, its hull reflecting starlight in patterns that seemed almost alive. To the watching aliens, it appeared laughably small, barely larger than an escape pod compared to the Zephyrian battleships that had been terrorizing this sector for years. Inside the fighter's cockpit, pilot Ashley Brooks ran her fingers across controls that responded to her touch like extensions of her own body. The ship's artificial intelligence hummed quietly in the background, processing millions of calculations per second while maintaining perfect harmony with its human pilot. Nighthawk to Fleet Command, Ashley's voice crackled over the radio, calm and professional despite facing down an entire raider fleet. Requesting permission to engage hostile targets. Orders are to keep this educational rather than destructive, correct? Admiral Rodriguez's response came immediately. That's correct, Brooks. Show them what we've learned in the past 3 centuries, but let's try to send them home with a story to tell rather than a funeral to plan. Copy that, Admiral. Beginning demonstration now. What happened next shattered every assumption the galaxy had about human military capabilities. The small fighter accelerated toward the Zephyrian fleet with impossible grace, moving in ways that defied 3 centuries of established physics. It wasn't just fast, it was fluid, liquid, dancing through space like it was swimming through water rather than vacuum. Commander Thek watched from his flagship's bridge as his gunners opened fire with everything they had. Plasma cannons that could melt through asteroid hulls unleashed their fury. Energy beams capable of cracking moons lit up the darkness. Missile salvos that had never missed their target streaked toward the tiny human craft. But the fighter moved through the barrage like it was choreographed. It twisted and spun, accelerated and decelerated in patterns that made no sense. Energy beams that should have vaporized it passed harmlessly through empty space as the ship seemed to predict where each shot would go before the weapons even fired. Impossible, Thek muttered, watching his sensors struggle to track the human vessel. No ship can move like that. The G-forces alone should have killed the pilot. His tactical officer looked up from his console, confusion written across his alien features. Sir, our targeting computers can't get a lock. It's like the ship knows what we're going to do before we do it. That's when Ashley Brooks decided to return fire. The fighter's weapons were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Instead of crude energy blasts or explosive missiles, it fired beams of light that bent and twisted through space like living things. The energy didn't travel in straight lines, it curved around obstacles, split into multiple streams, and converged on targets from impossible angles. Commander Thek's flagship, a massive battleship that had conquered dozens of worlds, suddenly found its shields failing under assault from a craft no bigger than a luxury yacht. The human weapons didn't just penetrate the shields, they seemed to understand them, finding weaknesses and exploiting them with surgical precision. Shields down to 40%, his weapons officer shouted. How is that possible? That ship is tiny. But Ashley wasn't trying to destroy the flagship. Her orders were educational, not lethal. The twisted beams of light carved precise holes through the battleship's armor, targeting specific systems with accuracy that bordered on impossible. Engine compartments were severed from power sources. Weapon batteries were disconnected from their firing mechanisms. Communication arrays were disabled with cuts so clean they could be repaired within hours. The entire demonstration took less than 3 minutes. When it was over, the Zephyrian flagship drifted helplessly in space, completely disabled but with its crew unharmed. The other Raider ships, seeing their supposedly invincible leader reduced to scrap metal by a single human fighter, made the only logical decision. They ran. All ships, retreat. Thek's voice cracked as he broadcast to his remaining fleet. Full emergency burn. Get us out of here now. The Zephyrian ships fled in every direction, their engines straining at maximum power as they desperately tried to escape the human fleet. As they ran, they broadcast warnings on every frequency they could access, telling the galaxy about the return of humanity's ghost fleet and weapons that broke the laws of physics. Outstanding work, Brooks, Admiral Rodriguez said as the human fighter returned to formation. Remind me to recommend you for another commendation when we get home. Ashley's laugh came over the radio. Just doing my job, sir. Though I have to say, their technology is at least 2 centuries behind ours. It was like fighting with training wheels on. While the Zephyrians fled and Ashley's fighter returned to its mothership, something remarkable was happening aboard the damaged research vessel. Human engineering teams had swarmed over the luminous dawn like helpful ants, their tools and equipment working with efficiency that seemed almost magical. Chief Engineer Tom Wilson stood in the research ship's engine room, scanning the alien hyperdrive with instruments that made the ship's own diagnostic equipment look primitive. Around him, his team worked with quiet confidence, replacing damaged components and realigning systems with practiced ease. Admiral, Wilson's voice came over the comm system, will have their ship operational in about 15 minutes. Pretty straightforward work, their hyperdrive just needs a quantum matrix realignment and some new power couplings. Basic stuff, really. On the research ship's bridge, Communications Officer Kira watched in amazement as human technology interfaced seamlessly with her ship's systems. Repairs that should have taken weeks in a proper shipyard were being completed in minutes by engineers who treated her civilization's most advanced technology like simple children's toys. How is this possible? She whispered to Captain Vex. Our hyperdrive is the most sophisticated piece of equipment in the sector. They're fixing it like it's a broken household appliance. Captain Vex could only shake his head in wonder. 3 centuries ago, humans had been considered primitive and aggressive by galactic standards. Now they were demonstrating technology so advanced that it might as well have been magic. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity hadn't disappeared, they had evolved into something far beyond anyone's imagination. The news traveled through the galaxy like wildfire, racing along communication networks that connected thousands of civilizations across hundreds of star systems. Within hours, every government, every military command, and every news organization knew the impossible truth: humanity had returned, and they weren't the same species that had limped away 3 centuries ago. On the capital world of the Galactic Council, emergency sessions were called at all hours. Ancient politicians who had been alive during the first human contact sat in darkened chambers, their faces illuminated by holographic displays showing grainy footage of the human fleet. The images were terrifying in their implications: ships larger than space stations, weapons that bent the laws of physics, and technology that made their most advanced systems look primitive. Ambassador Korvek, an elderly diplomat whose grandfather had negotiated humanity's original exile, studied the tactical reports with growing dread. The Zephyrian survivors are all telling the same story, he said to the assembled council. A single human fighter disabled their entire flagship in minutes. Their weapons don't behave like anything we understand. Meanwhile, aboard the flagship of the Third Human Fleet, Admiral Jake Rodriguez stood on his bridge watching the stars streak past as they traveled toward their next emergency call. The bridge was a marvel of human engineering, seamless interfaces that responded to thought as much as touch, displays that showed information in ways that maximized human comprehension, and an atmosphere that felt more like a comfortable office than a military command center. The long-range communication system activated, and suddenly the bridge was filled with holographic representatives from a dozen different alien governments. Some Rodriguez recognized from historical records, others were completely new species that humanity had never encountered before. Admiral Rodriguez, began the Keth Mori Chancellor, her voice carrying across light years of space. We need to understand your intentions. 300 years ago, your species agreed to remain in designated space. Why have you returned? Rodriguez remained calm, his hands clasped behind his back as he addressed the gathered aliens. Chancellor, 3 centuries ago your Galactic Council asked humanity to stay away from the inner systems. We honored that request completely. But we never agreed to abandon our core principles, and we certainly never agreed to ignore distress calls from people who need help. A new voice joined the conversation, Admiral Thane of the Regelian Defense Force, his tone aggressive and suspicious. Your technology has advanced far beyond anything we've seen. Some would consider that a threat to galactic stability. Admiral Thane, Rodriguez replied with a slight smile, we've had 300 years to develop new technologies, explore new frontiers, and learn from civilizations you've never even heard of. We've fought battles against threats that would terrify your worst nightmares, and we've built alliances with species from other galaxies entirely. But none of that changes who we are at our core. Captain Vex of the Luminous Dawn, whose ship had been fully repaired by human engineers in record time, stepped forward to join the conversation. Admiral Rodriguez, on behalf of my people, I want to thank you for saving us. But I have to ask, everyone believed humans were extinct. Where have you been all this time? Rodriguez's expression softened as he looked at the alien captain who had inadvertently summoned the most powerful fleet humanity had ever assembled. Captain, we've been busy. While the galaxy settled into comfortable patterns of trade and diplomacy, we kept exploring. We've mapped 17 different galaxies, made contact with hundreds of new species, and faced challenges that forced us to grow beyond what we were 3 centuries ago. He gestured to the displays around his bridge, showing star charts that extended far beyond the known galaxy. We've fought wars against machine intelligences that sought to consume entire star clusters. We've negotiated peace treaties with energy beings that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. We've learned to build ships that can travel between galaxies in hours rather than centuries. Commander Lisa Davis approached with a data tablet, her expression serious. Admiral, we're receiving multiple distress signals. 17 separate emergencies across this sector alone. Pirates, system failures, natural disasters, and what appears to be a slave trading operation. Rodriguez nodded, already mentally calculating the resources needed to respond to multiple crises simultaneously. Dispatch rescue teams to all locations. Priority goes to situations with immediate loss of life, but I want every single distress call answered within the next 6 hours. The alien diplomats watched in amazement as the human crew responded with practiced efficiency. Ships detached from the main fleet, each heading toward a different emergency with the kind of coordination that spoke of extensive experience in large-scale rescue operations. This is impossible, muttered the Centauri representative. No single fleet could respond to that many emergencies simultaneously. You're thinking like someone who's never had to manage multi-galactic operations, Rodriguez replied gently. When you're responsible for protecting civilizations scattered across 17 different galaxies, you learn to think big and move fast. He turned back to address all the alien representatives at once. I want to make something very clear to all of your governments. Humanity has no interest in conquest, territorial expansion, or political control. We're not here to upset your carefully balanced power structures or challenge your authority over your own space. Rodriguez paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. But we are here to help. Every species, every civilization, every individual who sends out a distress call will receive a response from human forces. We've become something new during our time away, a civilization dedicated to protecting those who cannot protect themselves. As if to emphasize his point, reports began streaming in from the rescue operations already underway. Human ships had arrived at the slave trading station and were systematically shutting down the operation while evacuating the victims. Engineering teams were repairing the damaged civilian vessels, their advanced technology making quick work of problems that would have taken local authorities weeks to solve. "Admiral," Captain Vex said quietly, "what you're describing sounds like you're planning to stay in our region of space indefinitely." Rodriguez smiled, and for the first time since the conversation began, there was something almost predatory in his expression. "Captain, we're not planning to stay. We are staying. The Third Human Fleet will establish a permanent presence in this sector, and will be joined by additional fleets from other human territories as needed." He looked directly at the alien diplomats, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Tell your governments that humanity has returned, but we're not the same species that left 3 centuries ago. We've become something far more capable, far more determined, and far more dangerous to those who prey on the innocent." As the massive human fleet split up to respond to multiple emergencies simultaneously, monitoring stations throughout human space returned to their vigilant watch. Deep in the void between galaxies, other human fleets received updated intelligence about their long-lost neighbors and began making preparations of their own. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity hadn't just survived their exile, they had used it to become the guardians they were always meant to be.